In Yemen, as the ceasefire is broken, the Saudi-led coalition is accused of bombing schools. Over 2 million people in South Sudan face hunger. And Serena Williams' Sports Illustrated cover is a grand slam. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is calling for urgent talks to avert civil war in Burundi. The UN and Western powers are concerned that Burundi, which only emerged from a civil war in 2005, could plunge back into ethnic conflict, destabilizing a region that witnessed a genocide in Rwanda in 1994. In the worst clashes since a military coup was foiled in May, insurgents attacked military camps in Bujumbura last Friday, and nearly 90 people were killed in the ensuing violence. The UN Human Rights Chief says the authorities have responded to the attacks with house searches, arrests, and alleged summary executions. The Central African country defended the actions of its security forces.
I am alarmed by the escalating violence in Burundi. What we have seen over the past few days is chilling. The country is on the brink of a civil war that risks engulfing the entire region. I have asked Mr. Jamal Ben Omar, my special advisor, to go to the region before the end of this week to speak to the African Union, the countries in the region, and of course the government of Burundi.
Well, the UN and the African Union have started preparing for the possible deployment of international peacekeepers in case the violence worsens. Where pro-government and rebel armed groups in Yemen have accused each other of breaking the UN-mediated ceasefire just hours after it came into effect Tuesday. As Henry Ridgwell reports, all sides in the conflict are accused of committing human rights violations.
Just hours after the UN-mediated ceasefire came into effect, there were reports of Saudi-led airstrikes in Sana'a and ground fighting in the southern city of Taiz. Both sides blamed each other for the attacks. Speaking Tuesday at the beginning of peace talks in Switzerland, the UN Special Envoy to Yemen appealed for compromise.
Yemen is being eaten up by fire from all sides as a result of the violence and the armed conflict in the country. And here we repeat again, the only solution is a political solution, and the violence must stop.
For months, Yemen has been spiralling toward all-out civil war between Iran-backed Houthi rebels and forces loyal to the president. A Saudi-led coalition of Gulf Arab states, aided by the United States, has been carrying out airstrikes against the Houthis since March. Nearly 6,000 people have been killed in the fighting. Aid groups say the humanitarian situation is catastrophic, with civilians living under a state of siege.
Unfortunately, about 2.5 million displaced have been around in different areas in not a well-prepared living situation. And this in itself is a high-risk area of mosquito breeding, of outbreaks of malaria, outbreaks of dengue.
Human rights groups have accused the Saudi-led coalition of attacking civilian targets. Riyadh and its backers deny targeting civilians. Amnesty International says at least 5 airstrikes since August have struck schools.
6,500 children were attending these schools, and all of them have had their education severely disrupted as a result. Schools should be a safe space for children and for civilian life. In some of these cases, these schools were targeted more than once and struck on repeated days.
Saudi Arabia has not responded to Amnesty's allegations. The peace talks are due to last a week, but rivals on the ground are not disarming. Yemen's Prime Minister claimed Wednesday that several of what he called resistance groups are being merged into one unified force to take on the Houthis. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
Now for the latest on the situation in Yemen, Zaid Al-Alaya, a journalist and analyst, joins me by phone from Sana'a. Zaid, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you very much.
Now, we know that the men and women having talks in Switzerland said they had reached a ceasefire agreement. Do the people inside Yemen really seem to be paying attention to that ceasefire deal?
people in Yemen, the people that I speak to in the streets, on public transportations, they become very afraid when they hear about a truce that was announced by the coalition, because they remember the previous truces that were signed, including the humanitarian truces. They did not even last for, the first one did not last for a couple of hours. The second truce that was agreed did not last for minutes. And now, with the truce announced, airstrikes are targeting more places. In Marib, Taiz, Harab, in the borders, was showered with loads of airstrikes on residential area, on a lot of places that do not even have like military bases or military sites. The airstrikes targets anything that is moving, including vehicles of residents, everything.
Now, what are you hearing? Why are both sides breaking this truce?
There is a lack of trust. There is suspicious. There is no real intention of truce. Saudis still very arrogant that they could do a sort of gaining more grounds in order to improve the options of the people that are talking, holding talks. If they gain more grounds, maybe this will improve their options. And the same thing with the Houthis also. When they advance into the Saudi borders, this also will make them more entitled to more options in the talks. Now, this is what mainly the two parties are working on.
Are there any quarters that are floating any other idea of how to really resolve this problem in Yemen?
Look, the choice is not in the hand of Yemenis. Yemenis do not have choice. If the big powers that are using Yemen, Iran, U.S., Europe, Saudi Arabia, if they want to stop this clash, stop this war, they will. But including the West now, everybody, including the UN, people are looking at whenever they write something negative against Saudi Arabia, it's sort of using Yemen to blackmail Saudi Arabia for more funds, for the UN, for the US, for even a lot of Western media that were reporting about Yemen airstrikes. They surprisingly stopped, and they are not more. They're no longer interested to cover airstrikes or to cover the humanitarian disasters in Yemen. They cover it once and then they disappear.
Well, Zaid, thank you very much. We hope we get more coverage from Yemen. Sana'a-based journalist Zaid Al-Alai is speaking to us from Yemen. Well, the World Food Programme estimates that 30 million people in Southern Africa are food insecure, meaning they don't know where their next meal is coming. That situation will continue at least until the next harvest in April. VOA's Mariama Diallo reports on what aid agencies are doing as some countries in Southern Africa face one of the most severe droughts in many years.
Several provinces in South Africa have been declared drought disaster areas, threatening food shortages across the country.
We should now be having pretty heavy rains. They have not happened. It's extremely hot where I am. The farmers, they can't yet plant their crops because there's no rain. Their livestock are dying.
Speaking via Skype from Johannesburg, WFP's David Orr says Malawi, Zimbabwe and Madagascar are the worst-hit countries. He says the first task has been to help the most vulnerable.
These are multi-million-dollar assistance programs. So in Zimbabwe, for example, we need to raise about $55 million. We're about 50% funded, I believe, for Zimbabwe. This is the big challenge, not just for WFP, but for all aid agencies. With so many huge humanitarian emergencies in the world at the moment, Syria, Iraq, South Sudan, Yemen.
While South Africa suffers from drought, Malawi has been hit with floods and late and erratic rains.
We have this combination of floods which wiped out a lot of the standing crops, principally maize, and then a short growing season, dry spells. There was an impact on legumes, beans, and some of the cowpeas that are grown.
Via Skype, Save the Children's Matthew Picard says the Malawi government has launched an emergency appeal for $140 million.
We're working with 450,000 of those people. Our response is $14 million, and it is predominantly looking at using cash transfers to vulnerable households to enable them to purchase food.
Picard says mobile cash transfers have reached 82,000 families since October. Mariama Diallo, VOA News, Washington.
Well, the climate change agreement reached in Paris last weekend will cut greenhouse gas emissions to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of global warming. While the accord is voluntary and falls short of limiting emissions to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels scientists are calling for, it does provide a roadmap to ramp up action with support from private investors. VOA's Rosanne Scabo has details.
The climate agreement reached in Paris last weekend will cut greenhouse gas emissions to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of global warming. Science is at the heart of the New Deal, in which nations pledge to work toward reducing emissions to zero, says Nicholas Hone via Skype.
It's basically saying it's the end of the fossil fuel era, and we have to do that very quickly.
But plans submitted in Paris fell short of that goal, though key provisions in the accord support greater commitment over time.
Number one, this treaty requires all the nations to take an inventory of their emissions. We've never had that before. Number two, they have to monitor these emissions and share that information with the world. It's all subject to standardized measurements and subject to monitoring and verification by experts.
Countries will return every 5 years to take stock, but the deal is voluntary and built on trust. Fossil fuels account for 80% of world energy use. Currently, renewable energy is not a realistic substitute for cheap oil or gas, especially in the developing world, says Jeff Olmsted with the U.S. law firm Bracewell & Giuliani.
But especially in Asia, there is an imperative to bring people out of poverty, to give those people many of the same advantages that we enjoy in our country today. And figuring out how to do that without increasing greenhouse gas emissions is a very challenging thing to do.
Homestead says an international price on carbon would help level the playing field. So would support for cleaner energy options from financial institutions, cities, and private corporations. Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates pledged such support in Paris and was joined by 28 other private investors.
We're launching the Breakthrough Energy Coalition. It's a global private investment group that will take risks that allow companies to get innovation out of the lab and into the marketplace. We'll focus on early-stage companies that could scale up to major carbon solutions.
Observers in Paris say the New Deal is not perfect, but progress was made.
So this gives us the tools to get started today, get better tomorrow, and keep at it for as long as it takes.
Countries will meet in April to sign the accord. Rosanne Skirbel, VOA News, Washington.
Well, we want to know what you think about issues that touch your everyday life. So each week we'll ask a question and we look forward to your answers. This week, our question is, how has climate change affected your community? From Facebook, Selianga Lee from Southwest China wrote, when I was a child, the weather was warm in winter, just like spring. Now the weather has become colder in winter. And Jerry Pan, also from Facebook, wrote, 20 years ago, there was a river in front of our house. We played in it in summer and skated in winter. But now, only in summer you can see the river. Well, thank you for your responses, and please keep them coming. Go to Facebook. The address is Africa54, and tell me which events in 2015 was the most significant for you. Or send me a tweet at VOA Vince Makori. Well, the mayor in the eastern U.S. city of Baltimore is urging people to remain calm following the mistrial of a police officer charged in the death of Freddie Gray. A day after the jury failed to reach a verdict in the trial of Officer William Porter, a judge on Thursday is set to meet with the prosecutor and Porter's attorney to discuss a retrial. Gray's family is urging the state's attorney to retry the police officer.
We are hopeful that Mr. Mosby will retry Officer Porter as soon as possible and that his next jury will reach a verdict. Once again, we ask the public to remain calm, patient, because we are confident there will be another trial with a different jury. We are calm. You should be calm, too.
A small group of demonstrators moved through Baltimore following the verdict, but there was no mass destruction of property or arrests like after Gray's death. Gray died as a result of injuries suffered while being transported without a seatbelt in the back of a police van in April. Prosecutors said Officer Porter ignored Gray's pleas for medical help and abused his power as a police officer. The defense calls Gray's death a horrible tragedy, but argued there was no evidence to convict Porter and that there is too much of a reasonable doubt.
Hung juries are not unusual. Approximately 5% of all the criminal cases that are tried in the country result in hung juries. Most of them are reprosecuted, and in a high percentage of those cases, there is a conviction. And so this hung jury does not mean it's the end of Officer Porter's case.
Porter could be retried or given immunity from further prosecution if he testifies in the upcoming trials of the 5 other officers charged in Gray's death. The second police officer charged in connection with Gray's death goes on trial next month. Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Check our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, the bad news about an increase in the number of babies born in conflict zones. Stay with us.
From Science and Technology, here's What's New.
What's new? It's called Swift Key Symbols. It's an Android app with a picture-based keyboard that makes it easier for kids with autism to express themselves. The app lets users construct sentences by picking an image from several categories, such as people, actions, and colors, then predicts and suggests other words to continue the sentence.
Want Friday, tomorrow, Saturday toy car.
So you want to play with your toy car?
This new technology is being used at Riverside School in London, where nearly 2/3 of the 220 pupils have autism. Charlotte Parkhouse is the school's language therapist.
To see our pupils use this app and suddenly they discover the joy of interaction between themselves and adults is really wonderful.
The Swift Key company in London has not announced a launch date for this app, which they say is still in the very early stages of testing. VOA's What's New. I'm Todd Grossans.
Well, the United Nations Security Council is expected to adopt new measures Thursday to stem the flow of cash to the Islamic State terrorists. For the first time, finance ministers of the 15-nation council will meet to adopt a resolution. The text is aimed at expanding and strengthening the current sanctions framework in place against al-Qaeda to focus on the Islamic State. U.S. Ambassador Samantha Power says she expects the resolution will be approved. Power says it would require countries to increase their efforts to choke off funding to the terrorist group, which has seized large areas of Syria and Iraq and is looking to expand its stronghold in Libya. Well, global investors in Europe and Asia are welcoming the U.S. Central Bank's decision to raise interest rates for the first time since the 2008 global financial crisis. As expected, the Federal Reserve Wednesday raised its main interest rate by 0.25 percentage point, pushing it up from near zero where it has been for 7 years.
I think it's important not to overblow the significance of this first move. It's only 25 basis points. Monetary policy remains accommodative.
The rate increase apparently is being seen as a sign of confidence in the U.S. economy by many in Asia, where stock markets surged on Thursday. In Europe, markets also reacted favorably. The dollar also made slight gains against most other major currencies.
It was very well received and mostly because it had been expected and expectations management had been excellent, we have to say. There was not aggressive expectations that the rate has to rise.
China, the world's second largest economy behind the U.S., responded cautiously to the Fed's decision, saying it will have to do an analysis to gauge the impact. China has experienced a steady economic slowdown since 2010, following decades of extremely rapid growth. Federal Reserve officials had previously cited the slowdown in China as a main reason that prevented them from raising interest rates earlier. Clara Frank, VOA News, Washington.
Well, it's time now for a health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu. Hello, Lino.
Hello, Vincent. The United Nations say the number of babies born in conflict zones has increased by more than 125,000 this year. According to data released by the United Nations Children Fund last year, 16.4 million babies were born into conflict zones. This year, it has risen to 16.6 million. That figure translates to 1 in 8 of all births worldwide in 2015. UNICEF says that children born in war are likely to suffer unhealthy emotional and cognitive development and are more likely to die before age 5 than are children born elsewhere. Experts say babies may also suffer if they were conceived as a result of rape committed in conflict. Next year, the UN agency says it projects an increase to 16.7 million babies born in conflict zones. Over 2 million people in South Sudan have fled their homes to escape conflict and are now facing hunger due to a crisis triggered by the nation's ongoing political conflict. 2 years of conflict has mostly affected civilians in the northern oil-producing Unity, Jonglei, and Upper Nile states, where hunger has become acute. Conflict, high food prices, and the worsening economy has pushed 4.6 million South Sudanese into hunger, according to an analysis carried out by aid agencies and the government earlier in the year. Humanitarians say malnutrition is now at catastrophic levels and there is a risk of famine in some places.
The harvest is poor this season, so as a result, we predict the hunger gap will come early and there will be shortage of food to the displaced people as well as the host community.
Humanitarian agencies say the conflict has killed thousands of people and seen over 500,000 others flee the country. Now, the Togolese government recently destroyed more than 24 tons of imported tilapia, a popular fish in most Togolese eateries. This happened following complaints about the fish containing highly toxic substances. According to experts from the University of Lomé who conducted the test, the fish contained high levels of veterinary drugs residues. When consumed, this can lead to fatal diseases. Analysts say the market for tilapia in Togo is large and lack of domestic supply is encouraging illegal imports from China. Under the watchful eye of Togo's Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries, hundreds of boxes containing tilapia fish imported from China were found to be unsuitable for consumption and set on fire in a large pit.
This stock contained high levels of veterinary drugs. They contain 28% of harmful veterinary drugs, when the maximum allowed is usually 10%. It means that these products are not suitable for consumption. I would say that they are very dangerous for public health because they contain cancerous elements.
People no longer want to eat fish, and I must confess that it has affected my business and profits. The authorities need to do everything in order to prevent bad products from entering our territory. We're suffering and have no money to go to the hospital.
And that's our Africa Health Report for today, Vincent.
Well, thanks a lot, Lino. Be sure to watch Lino Mudu's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come. For more news and information, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come on Africa 54. The powerhouse athlete who was picked to be Sports Illustrated's Sports Person of the Year. And that's our...
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines. In Nigeria, a court in Abuja grants bail to Biafran separatist leader Nnamdi Kanu. In Chad, hunger grows as more people are internally displaced in Chad due to intensifying Boko Haram fighting on the border with Nigeria. In Ivory Coast, General Dagbo Blay, a former strongman in the Laurent Gbagbo regime, and 18 others are at a military tribunal for the murder of General Robert Gay, a former junta chief. Finally, rebounding from Ebola, Liberia officially joined the World Trade Organization at a meeting in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. Serena Williams, who held all 4 of tennis's Grand Slam titles for the second time in her career and won 53 of 56 matches in 2015, was named Sportsperson of the Year by Sports Illustrated magazine. Williams is the first woman to be recognized with the honor as an individual since Mary Decker in 1983, and the magazine took the opportunity to rename its award from Sportsman of the Year to Sportsperson of the Year. The magazine also cited Williams as a force off the court, using her broad platform to advocate for racial justice, gender equality, and equal access to education around the world. Well, next up, it's a Charlie Brown Christmas at Macy's in New York City this year. The Herald Square store's famous window display honors the Peanuts Crew, and it's based on the beloved Charlie Brown special that's been airing in the U.S. for 50 years. At Barney's in New York, craftsmanship of a different kind takes center stage. The storefront displays feature ice curvers, chiseling out winter scenes. The window decorations are a top Big Apple tourist attraction, with planning kicking off a year in advance. Well, next up, with Christmas approaching, business is booming on Rodeo Drive. The shopping street in Beverly Hills, California, gives visitors a taste of the life of luxury, something that rarely seems to go out of fashion. So what do you buy for the person who has everything? Well, the big buzzwords this year are custom, tailor-made, and limited edition. That's according to the U.S. National Retail Federation. 21.8% of consumers surveyed say they will buy jewelry as a gift this season. Well, these gorgeous gems will set you back several million, while over at Baccarat, a limited edition vase costs whopping $38,000. Well, that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com for more news. Tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight. And that's our show. Have a good night. Thanks for watching.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Here's a colorful expression we use often in American English.
Out of the blue.
How can you get something out of a color?
I just got a message out of the blue on Facebook from my ex-boyfriend, Vladimir.
Oh boy. When was the last time you heard from him?
It's been like 5 years.
And he contacted you just out of the blue like that? Weird.
The expression out of the blue is used to describe any event that happens unexpectedly. There is no warning or time to prepare. The word blue in the expression refers to the clear blue sky. In our example, Anna was surprised by an out-of-the-blue message from an old boyfriend. And that's English in a Minute.